And we're back with Clare Cannon, an assistant professor at UC Davis. And Clare, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
So tell us a little bit about what environmental sociology is and why it's important to folks who work in the natural sciences.
This is a great question. So environmental sociology is just the study of interactions between society and the natural world. People take this in a lot of different directions. So people use environmental sociology to look at issues related to environmental justice, global political economy issues, so looking at carbon emissions, understanding transportation, supply chain, and these sorts of things, but really trying to understand, what is the social cost of these global dynamics and how do they relate to the environment?
How can we understand climate science and environmental justice through a feminist lens?
If we have to boil it down to kind of what is it that we mean by feminist, we really mean thinking about power and thinking about how power operates both in how science is produced, how it's received, how it gets taken up in different policy, legislative, and community action spaces. There's this idea within feminist theory and methods called standpoint, which basically is where I'm socially located. So the different axes that make up my social identity inform how I view the world. There are a few kind of key points, I think, for advancing climate science and environmental justice. So one is acknowledging the embedded context in which our science is occurring, identifying where power is embedded and operationalized, situating, so again, coming back to this idea of standpoint, so understanding that researchers have access to different resources, but there are also limitations. And then finally, centering. So a lot of my work in environmental justice and climate science, and I encourage others to do this, is really centering who benefits from this science and thinking about really centering their experiences and trying to learn from their knowledge because they know their communities better than anyone else.
Tell us more about your research into environmental exposure and the related health outcomes in the Central Valley.
So I use a community-driven, research-engaged approach, community-based participatory action research, and I have community partners in the Central Valley, El Pueblo, and Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice, and we've been leading a study in this little farm worker agricultural town in the Central Valley called Kettleman City. And together they identified concerns that they had about their environment that could infect their health. And one of the things that makes Kettleman City unique is that it hosts one of two Class 1 hazardous waste landfills in the state of California. And so these types of landfills typically take waste from oil refinery processes. So it's really hazardous. And so the community has been since this landfill went in, really concerned about are there health outcomes from this environmental burden.
What can AGU members gain from taking an intersectional approach to their research?
An intersectional approach will really increase the reach, rigor, and relevance of the science that AGU members are doing. It helps us advance our science by understanding that people are differentially affected. This is relevant to you because you can think about how these dynamics inform the natural world and people interact with the natural world and people oftentimes decide what happens to the natural world. And so being able to bring an intersectional approach is hugely important.
Thank you so much for joining us, Clare.
Thanks very much.